Have you ever made a decision that made sense at the time, one that felt responsible maybe or carefully considered, and yet somewhere down the line it stopped sitting right with you? This video is about that moment, the moment when a, quote, good decision stops feeling good. If you've been carrying that unease or anything like it for a while and can't quite explain it, stay with me here. So there's something that most people never hear when they're making a big decision. Many of the choices we call good are built around logic, responsibility, and survival. They answer the questions we've been taught to prioritize in life. So is this stable? Is this reasonable? Will this keep things from falling apart? And in the moment, those questions do matter, and they help us move forward in a way that tends to feel safe to us. Let me give you an example. Imagine a woman in her 40s or 50s named Ellen who gets laid off from her job, maybe one she's held for years. And it's a shock to her, but also opens something up. For the first time in a long while, she starts asking questions that she hasn't really let herself ask before. She wonders whether this is the moment that she's been given to try something different, something maybe more aligned with who she's becoming. And she starts thinking about something she's quietly wanted to do for years, but has never really had the time to do. She talks it through with maybe some of her friends, journals about it, or maybe she even lets herself imagine this different kind of life for a few weeks. And during that time, she feels like this new sense of excitement and joy that she hasn't felt in years. But then reality steps back in. She needs a paycheck. She wants stability, and she's afraid of the future. How is she going to take care of herself? What about her aging parents? They may need her help. And if she isn't employed, what then? She doesn't want to explain herself to everyone in her life. So when an opportunity comes along, another job in the same field with similar responsibilities and status to what she had before, it feels like the sensible thing to do, so she takes it. On paper, that's a success story. She's employed again, she's respected, and she's safe. Her life keeps moving forward. But over time, something starts to tug at her. Not dramatically, but just enough to be noticeable. She finds herself feeling restless in meetings at work. She feels tired in a way that sleep doesn't really fix. And every Sunday night, she dreads even more the coming Monday. Every now and then, she catches herself wondering why this new role feels heavier than the last one, even though it's basically doing the same thing as what she's done her entire life. What's happening here isn't that she made a stupid choice or even the wrong choice. It's just the part of her that noticed that this layoff felt like a turning point never really got acknowledged. That information didn't disappear just because she made the decision to take the other job. It still hung around, waiting for her to be ready to listen. And when she didn't, it got a little bit more persistent. And this is where people often start thinking, something is wrong with me, when actually what's happening is much more meaningful than that and much more right than that. So what's actually happening is that part of Ellen that noticed the turning point never stopped paying attention. So when she made her decision to take the job, she solved the immediate problem right in front of her. So she restored stability for herself, financial stability, she protected herself, and she kept her life intact. But there was also this quieter awareness inside her that was present at the time that might have preferred maybe a different direction. That awareness doesn't disappear once she makes her choice. It simply moved into the background. The same thing might have happened to you. You did what you thought you had to do, maybe. But then maybe it didn't feel so good later on. When that discomfort shows up, it isn't trying to undo your decision or tell you that you did something wrong necessarily. It's simply responding to the fact that you may have ignored the sparks that were there that rose up during the time that you were considering your next step. So you may still feel uneasy because that part of you is still aware that something's missing in your life. The joy, the excitement that you sensed, and you're still not doing enough to step into that. So here's what Ellen might do in this situation. Instead of asking what's wrong with her if she made the wrong decision, the most useful question becomes, how can she stay in relationship with that other part of herself now? How can she get back in touch with the intuitive part of her that was excited about not having to do this same old job every day? I have 3 ways that she might approach this without having to blow up her whole life or try to pretend that this feeling doesn't exist at all. So before trying to fix anything, Ellen needs to understand what this feeling is pointing toward. So this isn't really about labeling her decision as good or bad. Instead, what she wants to do is identify what part of her didn't get a voice at that time and what that part was responding to. So she might ask herself something like, what did I sense during that earlier moment that felt important, even if I couldn't act on it then? Or maybe, what possibilities did I briefly allow myself to imagine before I shut them down? Or what does this discomfort seem to be asking me to remember rather than to forget? Often simply naming the information in answering these questions softens the intensity of this feeling, because when you pay attention to that part of yourself that was trying to come forward, then it tends to relax a little bit because it's no longer being ignored. So it's not going to hammer at your mental door all the time saying, oh, you made the wrong decision. This wasn't what you're supposed to do. Instead of that, it's going to relax a little bit and say, okay, now we're talking to each other. Now I can bring up these things that I was trying to bring up before that were ignored, and we can discuss how we might pay more attention to it. So once this part of Ellen feels seen, the pressure to figure everything out starts to loosen up a little bit. So if she was feeling maybe like she shouldn't have taken the job, if she actually starts conversing with this intuitive part of herself to figure out what was the real message here, that pressure to do something different right now is going to lessen a little bit, which is going to make her feel better. So then we move to the second step, which is we're treating this as a conversation, not as a verdict. So Ellen might be tempted to treat this feeling as a final judgment. She might say that she blew it when she took this other job because she wasn't courageous enough to try something different. But that's taking it too far. Ellen did what she needed to do to survive, and that's perfectly okay. It could also be that she just didn't know how to honor this other part of herself, so she fell back on what felt familiar to her. That's very common when we're facing a life transition. The way ahead is unknown, so we often fall back on our usual routines. All Ellen has to do at this point is to open the door to a conversation with the inner part of herself. So she might ask herself, what feels incomplete about my current situation, without assuming that it's all wrong? Or maybe, where do I still feel alive, interested, or quietly pulled, even if I'm not acting on it yet? And what small questions keep resurfacing even when I try to distract myself? When Ellen approaches this as a conversation, the feeling becomes more informative and less oppressive. And that creates room for movement without forcing a dramatic leap. So the third step, one of the biggest mistakes Ellen could make at this point, is assuming that she has to act immediately or she has to suppress this feeling entirely. Either one of these could be a mistake. So let's say that she decides this was the wrong decision and she has to change it right away. And she daydreams about quitting this job and starting over and finally choosing the thing that she didn't choose before, which maybe in her case was writing, let's say. She imagines pulling out the stories she abandoned years ago and seeing them through, maybe taking a class and actually publishing a collection of poems or something. These thoughts energize her and make her feel hopeful again. So when she follows that impulse too far, though, the pressure sets in fast, because then she gets questions like, how would this ever pay the bills? What if I try this and my stories flop? Or she tells herself this is unrealistic, and so she leans harder into being competent and dependable at this job. She keeps her head down at work, and when the urge to write surfaces, she just brushes it aside, telling herself that it's indulgent or distracting or something she already missed her chance to pursue long ago. For a while, that strategy may keep things orderly in her life, but then the heaviness is going to return. But now it's even worse, as it's mixed with a grief that covers her at night when she's trying to go to sleep. She feels more closely this grief for the loss of this different direction that she had considered taking. So what changes things for Ellen isn't a resignation letter or a 5-year writing and publishing plan. It's a smaller decision that feels almost embarrassingly simple. All she does is this. She indulges that quiet voice inside her. For her, that means she starts writing again. That's it. But privately, she sets aside maybe 20 minutes in the early morning before the rest of the world needs her attention. And during that time, she writes essays or poems or stories or whatever she writes that she never intends to publish. But eventually, she joins a small writing group online just to meet other people who care about the same things she does. Nothing about her external life has to change right away. She still could have the same job, the same responsibilities, and the same financial realities. But internally, the pressure eases because the part of her that had been knocking on the door for attention finally has someone who's listening. Ellen begins to realize that what she wanted all along wasn't necessarily an immediate escape. It was just permission to do this thing that she always wanted to do, which brings her closer to herself. And once that relationship is restored, the next steps don't feel so urgent or so frightening. So if you're listening to this and thinking about your own decision maybe that you just made or may be soon making, and you're trying to figure out where it should land, what's the right call or the wrong one? Or maybe did you miss your chance or protect yourself exactly when you needed to? Most people get stuck right here, turning the decision itself into a central question. But the deeper issue isn't the decision necessarily that you made or are thinking about making. It's what happens after. Because long after a decision is made, there's often a part of us that keeps reacting to it. This is that low-level restlessness that we can't quite talk ourselves out of. And that reaction doesn't automatically mean that we chose wrong. Sometimes it just means that we chose what we had to at the time, but that something else inside of us was still waiting to be acknowledged. What tends to get overlooked is that this part of us doesn't disappear when we make the decision and move on. It doesn't get resolved by being responsible or practical or realistic, even though we may need to be those things. It simply stops being consulted, and over time, we gain a distance that creates tension. So the real work here, if you want to feel truly good about your life, isn't deciding whether to undo the past or make a certain decision a certain way. It's simply restoring contact to the part of yourself that noticed something important when you were considering this decision. And that part of you hasn't stopped noticing since. So when you reconnect with that part, when you let it speak to you without demanding immediate answers or action, your discomfort becomes information. And instead of feeling haunted by a decision, you can begin to feel oriented again and to use it to gather data on yourself. And that reconnection is often the real turning point, even before anything on the outside changes. So your investigation of the week. Don't try to solve the decision you're worried about or the one you're about to make. Forget about all that for now. Instead, study the part of yourself that keeps reacting to it. Set aside 10 minutes and start by writing down the decision that's still bugging you or that's in front of you. Name it very plainly. Then answer these 3 questions. First, when does this feeling tend to show up most often? Pay attention to the timing. Is it when you slow down, when you're exhausted, or when you're imagining your future, or maybe when you're watching someone else live a different type of life? Second, what part of you seems most activated by this decision? Is it a creative part, a relational part, a younger part, a part that wanted more freedom or more meaning in your life? Just notice how it feels and what it cares about. And finally, third, what has this part been missing since the decision was made? If you haven't made the decision yet, you can think about what part might be missing if I make this decision or that decision. In other words, what are you still missing in your life? Is it excitement, purpose, expression, play? All you have to do is write down those feelings. And when you're done, just let it rest for a day or two. What you're trying to do is reopen a conversation that eventually may lead you somewhere new. But for now, you just want that inner part of yourself to feel heard. If you're feeling like your life isn't quite right now, check out my short guide called The Signals Journal. It gives you the 7 signs that your life is trying to ask you for a change, and it can help you figure out what that change might be leading you toward. And if you want to keep going on this issue, I'd recommend watching the next video coming up on the end screen, where I talk about why overthinking often shows up right after moments like this, after you make decisions, and how it can quietly pull you away from the very clarity you're trying to find. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you there.